In 2026, the editors of the Guinness Book of Records removed an entry that had been there for 25 years. It was about the oldest octopus on the planet. It turned out that it wasn't an octopus at all. And today, there will be 12 stories like this. Hello, my friend. You're on the Kurtop channel. Today, you'll find out about a Tyrannosaurus discovery that went unnoticed for 7 years because it was gathering dust on a museum shelf. You'll see what was found inside a mummy from an Egyptian necropolis that hadn't been opened for 4,300 years. And at the end, you'll find out what exactly the Curiosity rover photographed on its way to the crater and why scientists still can't explain it. Ready? Let's begin. Not an octopus. 300 million years. In 1988, in the state of Illinois, a small fossil was taken from a layer of rock. Unremarkable, just a bit bigger than a hand. They examined it and saw 8 tentacles, fins, and a distinctive body shape. The surrounding rock is about 300 million years old. This meant that octopuses appeared 150 million years earlier than science had previously thought. The article was published in 2000. Guinness added an entry for the oldest octopus on the planet. Evolution textbooks were updated, and dozens of studies on the history of cephalopod mollusks were rewritten from scratch, all based on a single unremarkable stone from Illinois. For 25 years, no one really paid much attention to this fossil. Then scientists from the University of Reading scanned it with next-generation X-ray imaging, so powerful that it revealed the structure inside the stone, something ordinary light could never capture. It's similar to an X-ray in a hospital, only 1,000 times brighter. And inside, they found a small rasp with rows of teeth, an organ that all mollusks have without exception. Octopuses have 7 or 9 teeth in each row. Here, there were 11. It wasn't an octopus, but a relative of the nautilus, a sea mollusk with a coiled shell, which has survived to this day almost unchanged, and which is sometimes called a living fossil. The creature had already partially decomposed before it fossilized, and in just a few weeks of decomposition, its shape changed so much that for 25 years, everyone thought it was an octopus. The Guinness editorial team commented briefly, "The entry is removed until new evidence appears. Octopuses now appear in the history of life on Earth much later, and the whole picture of their evolution changed because of a single analysis." At the same time, the fossils from Illinois turned out to be the oldest soft tissues of a nautilus relative in the world. They broke the previous record. The record was broken by 220 million years at once. The mistake led to another discovery. And here is what is most alarming. This fossil lay in the museum for 25 years with the correct label. It was cited in serious scientific papers and taught to students. How many exhibits are standing behind glass right now with the same kind of incorrect labels and calmly waiting for a new X-ray? Tyrannosaurus's grandpa on the shelf, 74 million years. In a museum storage room in New Mexico, a bone almost a meter long was gathering dust, a tibia, heavy, with a distinctive curve that any paleontologist would recognize at first glance. It sat in a box with an inventory number among hundreds like it, mostly ignored. In places like this, thousands of bones are stored. And at some point, all of this just becomes background noise. Paleontologist Nicholas Longrich from the University of Bath picked it up, and something didn't add up. The rock from which the bone was extracted was dated to 74 million years old, whereas the classic Tyrannosaurus, Tyrannosaurus rex, lived 66 million years ago. That's an 8 million year difference. It's kind of like finding a smartphone in a geological layer where there should only be phones with physical buttons. Everything looks familiar, but something is fundamentally off. When Longrich started calculating, the numbers turned out to be even more interesting. The bone is only 16% shorter than the corresponding bone in Sioux, the largest known Tyrannosaurus skeleton. And recalculating the proportions gave a weight of 4.7 tons. So this animal was 50% heavier than any of its contemporaries. To grasp the scale, take an ordinary Tyrannosaurus from a textbook and mentally add half of its own weight on top. This is what stood in the southwest of North America 8 million years before T-Rex even appeared on the scene. Longrich says it directly. This is an exact copy of a Tyrannosaurus. If this bone had been found in the same layers as the classic T-Rex, no one would have doubted its identity, but it was found earlier, and that changes everything. This is one of the most persistent beliefs in dinosaur science. Until now, it was believed that the ancestors of tyrannosaurs came from Asia, but several large and very ancient forms are concentrated specifically in the southwest of North America, millions of years before T-Rex appeared further north in Montana and Canada. The picture comes together on its own. The king of the dinosaurs grew up here. Asia has nothing to do with it. Until there is a complete skeleton, there is no name. Longridge continues the excavation, hoping above all to find teeth. They are preserved in stone better than large bones. But the main thing has already happened. The bones stood on the shelf for 7 years, unwanted by anyone. And all this time it contained a story that rewrites the origin of the most famous predator in the entire history of life on Earth. How many such stories are still lying in boxes with inventory numbers? Spiny dragon, 125 million years. In northeastern China, paleontologists uncovered another dinosaur skeleton, and then they stopped. Skin appeared under the brush, not a faint imprint in the stone, not a blurred outline, but real fossilized skin covered in spikes. The dinosaur belonged to a group of herbivores that scientists have been studying for almost 200 years, and which has long been considered one of the best studied in paleontology. In 2 centuries of discoveries, no spikes have ever been seen in this group, not in a single species. Here, the spikes were of different sizes all over the body, and the tail is additionally covered with overlapping scales, like tiles on a roof, layer by layer. It was unofficially called the spiny dragon. But the biggest surprise isn't the spikes themselves. Scientists examined the skin under a powerful microscope, and they got down to individual cells, the very ones that make up the spikes, after 125 million years underground. For comparison, the spikes were made of the same material as our nails and hair. Under normal conditions, this material would break down in just a few decades. In human burials, it disappears completely. For it to survive 125 million years. It took a perfect combination of circumstances. In the first hours after the animal's death, the right soil, patience, the right temperature, the right speed of burial in sediment. Thousands of other dinosaurs with the same interesting skin simply dissolved without a trace. We got lucky with this one. Scientists haven't yet figured out why a herbivore would need spikes. Maybe for protection from predators. Maybe for regulating body temperature. Some dinosaurs used large growths on their backs for that. Maybe for sensing the world around them. There's nothing to compare it to, because nothing like this has ever been found. This group has been studied for nearly 200 years, and suddenly a new species appears. A species that shouldn't exist, with skin that shouldn't have been preserved. Share your thoughts in the comments. How many more secrets like this remain underground? Subscribe so you don't miss when the next one like this is found.
Wow.
Quarry, 220,000 years. In South Africa, scientists from Germany started digging in a place where sharp, hard stones were sticking out of the ground, perfect for making cutting tools. They sifted every cubic meter of soil by hand so as not to miss a single fragment, and they found from 200,000 to 2 million worked fragments per cubic meter. This is not a typo. Thousands of traces of work. Stones on which they tested the strength of the rock. Tiny chips from stoneworking. Heavy hammer stones. At the same time, almost no finished tools. No signs of habitation. No food remains. People came here. They worked the stone a little. They took the blanks with them and left. Purposefully. Like going to work. Dating showed that this place was used as far back as 220,000 years ago, until 110,000 years BCE for 100,000 years in a row. For comparison, the entire history of Egypt, from the first pharaoh to the present day, is about 5,000 years. Rome existed for under 3,000 years from its founding to its fall. Yet knowledge of this valuable stone location was handed down for 20 times longer than everything we call the history of humanity has existed. Without books, without maps, without records. A father showed his son where to go. And so it went on for 100,000 years in a row. One of the researchers took one of the fragments and began reassembling them, matching breaks like a 3D puzzle. Eventually, he restored the original rock blocks, and he literally saw exactly how the master worked 200,000 years ago. How he held the stone where he struck what he wanted to achieve. Before this discovery, it was believed that ancient people picked up stones randomly along the way. This site showed otherwise. They knew where the best material was. They planned routes and organized extraction. 220,000 years before any writing, before any city, before any state. Fire, fish, and driftwood, 780,000 years. In the north of modern Israel in the Jordan River Valley, there's a place called the Bridge of the Daughters of Jacob. Here, on the shore of a long-vanished lake, 780,000 years ago, very ancient people stopped. They were not yet those whom we call modern humans, but they were already quite similar to us. Scientists found charcoal from campfires, 266 samples. In most cases, they determined exactly which type of tree the wood came from. More than half of the charcoal turned out to be remnants of ash trees. Almost a tenth was olive, but these trees didn't necessarily grow near the campsite in such quantities. So where did all this firewood come from? From the lake. Trees fall into the water. The current carries trunks and branches, and the lake throws them onto the shore. This is called driftwood, and scientists concluded that this place was chosen as a campsite, in part because the lake itself delivered ready-to-use fuel. There was no need to chop or carry wood. The firewood floated right up to the shore, 780,000 years ago. Food remains were found on the surface of stone tools, acorns, wild grains, nuts, aquatic plants, and fish bones, caught right in this lake and cooked over a fire. There are no hearths in the usual sense at the campsite, only scattered traces of burning in different spots, which investigators called phantom hearths. Probably they didn't start a new fire each time. Instead, they preserved the ones already burning. They carried smoldering embers with them and didn't let the fire go out. Even today, there are tribes in Africa that do exactly the same, because making fire by friction takes a long time and is difficult, but preserving an already burning fire is much easier. There is even older evidence that people used fire in this region, about 1 million years ago, at another site in Israel. The boundary is pushed further back into the past every few years, but the site on the shore of this lake stands out because of its details. Here we see not just traces of fire, but a specific choice of location, a specific choice of fuel, a specific fish, cooked in a specific way. 780,000 years ago. Meteoric iron, 1,201,000 BC. In the southwest of China, in Sichuan province, at the headwaters of the Yangtze River, there is a place called Sanxingdui. It may be the remains of the capital of an entire state. Almost no written records about it have survived. In the sacrificial pits here, amazing things are found. Huge bronze masks with bulging eyes, over 1 meter tall, golden scepters, jade figurines. The craftsmanship of these items is so impressive that it's hard to believe they were handmade. In one pit, a fragile, crumbling object resembling an axe was found in terrible condition. It's about 20 centimeters long. It was extracted directly from the ground, cleaned in the laboratory, and the metal composition was analyzed. It turned out to contain almost 20% nickel. That's an important figure. Iron extracted from ore found on Earth contains less than 1% nickel, but iron from a meteorite gives exactly these numbers, about 20% and higher. Someone found a stone that fell from the sky, realized it was harder than anything else on Earth, and made a tool out of it. Around 1,201,000 BC, several centuries before people in this region even learned how to smelt iron from ore. But such finds exist all over the world. In Egypt, there are meteorite iron ornaments that are over 5,000 years old. They were made even before the pyramids were built. In Western China, there's a knife from around 3000 BC. In Turkey, there's an amulet that's almost 5,000 years old. In Poland, there are bracelets and pins that are about 2,600 years old. In different parts of the world, in cultures that had no idea about each other, people looked up at the sky. They saw falling stones and realized that they were more valuable than gold, because they really were more valuable. Iron is stronger than bronze and sharper than copper. The first metal that humanity encountered fell from the sky. Tell me in the comments, did you know about this? The Singapore Stone, 180 years of silence. In 1819, British sailors discovered a huge sandstone boulder, about 3 meters high, at the mouth of the Singapore River. There were inscriptions carved on its surface. dense lines of unfamiliar symbols that did not resemble any known script. Colonial officials made drawings of the inscription, took rubbings, and sent copies to scholars in Calcutta. The scholars looked at them and shrugged. The script could not be deciphered. In 1843, the stone was blown up. British engineers were expanding the fort. The boulder was in the way of construction, so they simply destroyed it. A few fragments were saved in time. They were sent to Calcutta for study. Most of them were lost along the way. In the end, only a single fragment made it back to Singapore, and it is now kept in the National Museum. Rough sketches from 1819 and this fragment are all that remain of the inscription, which consisted of about 50 lines. The script on the stone did not match any known writing systems. It was closest to the ancient Javanese Kawi script, but it was not the same. It was dated approximately somewhere between the 10th and 14th centuries. What exactly was written there, who wrote it, and in what language remained a mystery for almost 200 years. In 2025, a group of linguists introduced a program that works roughly like this. It takes the preserved symbols, assigns a code to each one, analyzes the distance between them, and identifies spaces. Based on how similar languages are structured, it predicts which symbols might have been on the missing fragments. As a result, you don't get just one version of the text, but several possible ones, with different options for filling in the gaps. Though not fully deciphered for the first time in 180 years, there are specific versions of what may have been written there. The stone was destroyed to build a fort that was later demolished. The fort was torn down for other buildings, which are also now gone. The inscription destroyed with the stone is now being reconstructed using 19th century sketches and a neural network. The Singapore stone is among about a dozen scripts in the world that still haven't been deciphered. Among them are the Cretan Linear A script, the Proto-Elamite script from ancient Iran, the script of the Indus Valley Civilization, and the famous Phaistos disc from Crete, on which symbols are arranged in a spiral, and their meaning has remained unknown for over 100 years. All these scripts share one common problem. There is too little text to statistically reconstruct the language. The fewer the samples, the less chance there is to find patterns. There are especially few samples of the Singapore stone, just one fragment and rough sketches made 200 years ago. The program developed by linguists is designed to work with minimal material, trying to guess the structure based on indirect evidence. Whether it will work out is still unknown, but this is the first real attempt in 180 years. An army in the swamp, year 205 AD. In Denmark, in the eastern part of the country, there is an old swamp called Illerup Odal. Incredible. Several decades ago, they started finding weapons there, and it hasn't stopped. Now the total count has exceeded 15,000 items: swords, spears, shields, belts, horse harnesses, personal belongings. Scientists say that there is just as much still lying in the bog. All of it was deliberately destroyed, bent, broken, thrown into the water as an offering to the gods from those who had won. And that's exactly why everything has been so well preserved for almost 2,000 years. Around 205 AD, about 1,000 warriors crossed Denmark. They went south to enlist in the Roman army, which at that time paid foreign warriors with silver coins to guard the northern borders of the empire. All the swords and coins found with the dead were Roman. That means the connection to Rome existed even before they set out. Someone paid them in advance. From Denmark to the nearest Roman border is about 650 kilometers. That's a month's journey on foot. 1,000 people need more than a ton of food a day, and there was nowhere to buy it. So they took it from the locals along the way. The local tribes of Jutland responded with war and completely defeated the army. The victors took everything valuable. They deliberately bent every sword and every spear so that the weapons could no longer be used, and they sank everything in the bog. Among the finds are items that point to Norway as the place where the army came from. Combs made from elk and deer antlers. Special flints for making fire, characteristic only of these places. The analysis of horse bones points to another region. Scientists are still debating, but something else is important. Several blades have inscriptions engraved in runes, some of the oldest known to us. These are the personal names of the owners: Lagutievas, Gaups, Nitijo, Svarta. One of the leading researchers of this discovery studied separately what was happening in Scandinavia around the same period, from the end of the 2nd to the beginning of the 3rd century AD. And the picture turned out to be interesting. It was at that time that large wooden halls began to appear in Norway and Denmark, long, with high roofs. They were built much like Roman basilicas. Meanwhile, iron production rose sharply, and southern trade routes were established. And in the burials of the nobility, Roman silver, Roman weapons, and Roman tableware began to appear. Researchers believe that all this was brought by those who returned home from the Roman army. They saw how the empire was organized, how buildings were constructed, how trade was arranged, and they reproduced this at home. The army that drowned in the Jutland bog was part of that movement. They just didn't make it to Rome. Which country are you from? Write in the comments. It's interesting to see where our viewers are from. Execution pit near Cambridge, 9th century. In England, not far from Cambridge, student volunteers were doing archaeological fieldwork. They were digging carefully, layer by layer, and they found a pit with the remains of at least 10 E. At the bottom of the pit, there were 4 relatively intact skeletons, and on top of them, someone had thrown skulls, arms, and legs in complete disarray. Body parts from different people mixed together and thrown in. 9th century AD. This place was located on the border between English lands and Viking territory, one of the bloodiest frontiers in all of medieval Europe. One of the skulls stood out right away. A young man, 17 to 24 years old, about 196 centimeters tall. At that time, the average man was about 20 centimeters shorter. On the side of the skull, there was a neat round hole about 3 centimeters in diameter with smooth edges. The edges of the hole had started to heal. The bone began to grow, starting to close the hole. This means the hole was made while he was alive. And after the operation, he lived for quite a while. Days, weeks, maybe even longer, so that the bone had time to start healing. Then he was killed and thrown into this pit. Scientists suggest that his height and the holes in his skull are connected. There is a condition where the gland at the base of the brain, which controls growth, becomes overactive. A person grows much taller than normal, but at the same time, the pressure inside his skull keeps increasing and he starts having severe headaches. The holes were most likely drilled specifically to relieve this pressure, and the operation worked. The patient survived. In 1976, another mass grave from the 8th or 9th century with 5 people was found in roughly the same place. The current discovery is the first in almost 50 years and is significantly larger. Isotope analysis and DNA work are still ahead, which will take several years. Even now, it's clear someone in the 9th century could drill a skull so the patient could recover and go home. We don't know this young man's name. We know students found him during the first real investigations of their lives. Golden Mummy, 4,300 years old. Egypt, Saqqara Necropolis, 30 kilometers from Cairo. Egyptian scientists opened a 15-meter deep shaft and at the very bottom saw a stone coffin sealed with lime mortar. The seal was intact. It hadn't been touched since the very day it was placed there 4,300 years ago. Most Egyptian tombs were looted back in ancient times, sometimes just a few decades after the burial. This one remained untouched for 43 centuries. Inside lay the mummy of a man named Hekashepes, and his body was covered with thin gold sheets placed directly over the burial wrappings. In ancient Egypt, gold was called the flesh of the gods, a material that does not rust, does not darken, and does not decay. Only those who were in the closest circle to the pharaohs were allowed to have their bodies covered with gold during the burial. Priests and officials of lower rank were not granted such an honor. On the floor of the burial chamber lay an untouched layer of dust, and in this dust there were preserved footprints, the traces of the workers who last left the chamber and sealed it from the outside. After them, not a single person had been here. In the neighboring shafts of the same complex, they found the tomb of a priest with 9 limestone figurines, which according to Egyptian beliefs were supposed to receive sacrificial offerings instead of the deceased owner, and the burial of a man named Phaetex with wooden statues in a stone sarcophagus. Wood almost never survives in Egyptian soil, and these items began to deteriorate literally within the first hours after being uncovered. They had to be urgently preserved right on the spot. On the walls of all the chambers, there are reliefs with names, lists of titles, images of relatives, and scenes from everyday life. Egyptians were not buried nameless. Every person left behind a detailed stone story about who they were. Saqqara never ends. Every year new shafts are discovered there, and yet less than half of the entire necropolis has been excavated, which was formed over almost 3,000 years. Subscribe, and when something important is found, we'll be the first to tell you. Near the tomb of Hekashepes, there used to be burials of royal priests and high-ranking courtiers. This suggests that the area was used specifically for people close to the pharaoh. The Saqqara necropolis is on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and several international teams are excavating there simultaneously. In 2023, a large Egyptian museum opened near the pyramids of Giza, where some of these finds eventually end up. Homer's papyrus inside a mummy. The Spanish-Egyptian expedition was excavating a necropolis in the Egyptian city of Oxyrhynchus. Mummies, burial items, standard work. Until they found a papyrus inside one of the mummies and unrolled it to reveal the Greek text of Homer's Iliad. Inside the book was the very part where all the Greek troops and ships heading to Troy are listed. The names of the cities, the leaders, and the number of ships from each. One of the most detailed and lengthy passages in the entire poem. Oxyrhynchus is famous for the fact that, at the end of the 19th century, 1,000 papyri were found here in ancient garbage heaps, texts that people threw away when they were no longer needed, and which lay there for almost 2,000 years. Among them were fragments of plays and poems that were thought to be lost forever. But the Homer papyrus was not found in a garbage heap, but inside a person. Someone placed it there deliberately just before the burial. Why? At that time, Egypt was under Roman rule, and Greek education was a marker of high society. The ability to read Homer distinguished an educated person from an uneducated one, just as clearly as a diploma from a prestigious university does today. Perhaps the papyrus was placed as a sign of status, or perhaps as protection. The Iliad contains hundreds of names and places, and the deceased might have believed that the text would protect him just as Egyptian spells did. Scholars do not have a definitive answer. Other items were also found in the necropolis. Some deceased had gold and copper tongue-shaped plates in their mouths. They were placed so that the person could speak at the judgment in the realm of the dead before the god Osiris. Next to the bandaged mummies, there were vessels with burned remains. Different burial traditions in one place. Clay figurines of Egyptian gods stood next to a small bronze statuette of Cupid. Cat skulls are carefully wrapped in linen cloth. All of this was found together in one necropolis, from people who lived at the same time and buried their dead side by side, each following their own customs. Oxyrhynchus is a truly special place in the history of ancient texts. By the late 19th century, people systematically excavated old garbage heaps here, unearthing thousands of papyrus fragments, texts once thought lost forever. Fragments of plays, poems, and works, once known only by title, have been found. Some texts weren't discarded by Oxyrhynchus residents, but were buried with them. The first Maya filling. In a pre-Hispanic burial, a molar was found, a lower back tooth, one of those that are deep in the mouth. A small cavity was carefully carved into the surface of the tooth, and inside it was a green jadeite stone. The Maya civilization was known for ornamentation. Jade, turquoise, and hematite were inserted into the front teeth. This was visible when speaking and showed a person's social status. A molar in the back of the mouth is never visible under any circumstances, so it could not have been an ornament. Scientists performed a tomographic scan of the tooth, similar to what is done in dental clinics, but much more powerful, and looked inside without touching the find. Inside the pulp chamber, they found mineral deposits that form only in a living tooth in response to trauma or prolonged stress. The tooth reacted to interventions during its owner's lifetime. The owner of the tooth was between 24 and 30 years old. Someone carved a cavity in the living tooth, placed jadeite inside, and secured it, presumably with natural plant resins that the Maya used for medical purposes and that have antibacterial properties. The stone was inserted in such a way that it did not interfere with chewing. In other words, the person who did this made sure that the tooth would continue to function normally after the procedure. This is the first dental filling in human history that has been physically confirmed. In other regions of the world, traces of dental drilling have also been found in ancient remains. For example, in Pakistan, drilled teeth about 9,000 years old were discovered. But in that case, it was only drilling. Here, the tooth was drilled, the damaged tissue was removed, and the cavity was sealed with a permanent material. So this is a full-fledged filling, not just a hole. For the Maya, jade also had a sacred meaning as a symbol of life and water. So the procedure could have had a ritual significance in addition to a medical one. This is the first such discovery in world archaeology. The Maya performed dental operations starting around the year 300 AD using tubular drills made of nephrite or quartz, with the addition of abrasive powder from crushed minerals. Judging by the findings, patients survived the operations. There are no signs of widespread inflammation around the modified teeth in the burials. A jadite filling in a molar shows their skills were used even on hidden teeth, indicating it was for treatment, not decoration. Scales on Mars, 3.8 billion years. In April 2024, the Curiosity rover was moving toward a small crater about 9 meters in diameter, which scientists named Antofagasta. There, organic substances may be preserved in the rock, traces of chemistry that could have preceded the emergence of life. On the way, the rover stopped by a rock and took a picture of it with its camera. On the surface, there is a texture of regular polygons that cover several meters in a row. They are all about the same size. They all have a similar shape, like the scales of a giant creature. A NASA engineer published the photo. The agency reported, similar structures in Martian rock have been seen before, but never on this scale, and with such clarity. Scientists have an explanation. About 3.6 to 3.8 billion years ago, Mars was a different planet. Rivers ran across it with lakes and maybe even seas. Wet silt settled in these waters and slowly solidified. When clay dries after getting wet and then gets wet again and again, it cracks in exactly this way, forming regular hexagons or polygons, like the mud at the bottom of a dried-up puddle. Only here, this happened on a planetary scale over millions of years. Then Mars lost its water and atmosphere forever, and since then this surface has remained untouched. There is no rain on Mars, no wind in the way we have it on Earth, and no life that would dig everything up. What happened there? 3 billion years ago has stayed there. Curiosity continued moving toward the Antofagasta crater. Scientists hope to find organic molecules there, carbon compounds that could indicate that chemical processes once took place on Mars, which under certain conditions could have led to the emergence of life. For now, it's just a hope. The results of the rock analysis in the crater will take several months. Curiosity has been operating on Mars since August 2012. During this time, it has traveled about 35 kilometers, which is roughly the distance a person covers during half a day of walking. Every meter of the journey takes hours of work from engineers, and almost every few months it sends a photo that leaves scientists puzzled. Here's one of those photos. The Curiosity rover has been operating since 2012 and still manages to surprise us. During all the time the Curiosity rover has been working on Mars, which is more than 13 years, it has traveled about 35 kilometers. For comparison, an average person walks that distance in half a day, and yet almost every few months it sends a photo that leaves scientists puzzled. In the Alerup Adal bog in Denmark, 15,000 items have already been found, and scientists say that just as many still remain untouched in the ground. The Sahara necropolis in Egypt has been excavated less than halfway, and every year, new shafts with untouched seals are uncovered there. Each of the discoveries in this video was made by accident. Someone grabbed the wrong bone from the shelf, another dug a training trench, and someone else strayed off course. Subscribe and enable notifications to learn about these discoveries first. I'll be waiting.